Okay, so I was recently asked a question on one of the YouTube comments, so we'll just pull that up here. So the question was, what are five major OpenShift and OVN skill sets and habits, and how do you train to be successful in your career without burning out? I think it's something I'm super passionate about. This is something I could talk about for actually quite a long time. I don't need a coffee. So I think the first thing, let's start with the burnout question. The first thing and most important thing to avoiding burnout, I think, is just being passionate about what you're learning. So, like, I really enjoy technology. I really enjoy understanding how something like OpenShift works. I enjoy learning about how something like OpenStack works. And I think that's a very important thing to have if you're in this industry and you want to avoid burnout. Otherwise, it can be quite frustrating when things don't work if you're not enjoying learning what you're learning about. And that kind of brings me to the second point. It's about reframing how you feel about that frustration when something doesn't work. I think, when we're trying to do something or we want to get something up and running and then it doesn't work, that can be a very frustrating experience. But I think the important thing is to reframe that as a positive. So, this didn't work. That's a fantastic opportunity for me to now learn something that I didn't know before. So, when I first started deploying OpenShift, I did the update from one version to the next. I just clicked the button in the GUI and it all worked. And I thought, wow, that's really boring. It worked really well. It must be a great customer experience, but I didn't get the opportunity to learn much. So the next time I tried to upgrade it to an image that wasn't in my supported upgrade path. So I forced it onto an image that it wasn't included in my upgrade path. And basically what happened was later that night, I noticed some failed daemon sets and I thought, great, this is a really good opportunity for me to learn about how this works. So that's what I'll do tomorrow. And I went to bed, I come back the next day and all the daemon sets were fine, all the cluster operators were fine, and it had just resolved the problem itself. So again, great customer experience, but for me personally, I didn't get the opportunity to learn much from that. And that's the most valuable thing for me is that I want things to break. I really honestly enjoy when something breaks and doesn't work because now I get to dig into how it works, how it's supposed to work, and what actually went wrong. So that's probably where I would start with OpenShift. If you're trying to learn OpenShift, but you don't know Kubernetes, I would suggest go and deploy Kubernetes first. Go and use kubeadm to bootstrap a cluster, pick a CNI plugin, deploy a CNI plugin, pick an ingress controller, deploy your ingress controller, start deploying apps, start trying to make things work. Because in that process, you're going to learn about all the things that actually happen behind the scenes and are handled for you in OpenShift, but you're going to have an understanding of what you would need to do manually. So that helps you if one of those cluster operators fails, like your network operator fails, well, you know that to install a CNI plugin, you need to take some steps. And those steps include creating daemon sets. And then those daemon sets create files on the host for the CNI, for the container runtime to talk to the CNI and plug in those network diffs. Those are really important fundamentals to have, and it can be really easy when you're learning OpenShift to overlook some of those because OpenShift does so much for you. So I guess my advice there on how do you approach learning things, it's take it back to the basics. Set yourself some really achievable goals. Don't set out with the goal of I'm going to learn OpenShift, because what about OpenShift are you going to learn? Are you going to learn how the cluster version operator works and handles the lifecycle management of your cluster and all of the associated cluster operators? Are you going to learn about networking with OVN? Are you going to learn about the API server? There's so many aspects of OpenShift that setting the goal of I'm going to learn OpenShift is too lofty in my opinion. I think you really need to hone down what it is you want to learn about. And if what you actually want to learn about is Kubernetes, then I would suggest start with Kubernetes, deploy a kind cluster, break it, see what happens when you delete a random file on a random node. Does it recover from it? What do you need to do to recover from it? Those are really important fundamental skills to have. But I think you really need to be interested in it to do that. Otherwise, that's just frustrating. Like I look at all these videos of software engineers online that are really glamorized and riding their bikes around and doing all this kind of crazy crap. I spend my whole day sitting in front of my laptop or in front of my computer wondering why my unit tests don't work, or trying to figure out how to get abstract data from here to there, put it in a dictionary and reference it with Ansible. There's a lot of things that would be very boring if I wasn't interested in the job that I do and I wasn't interested in the technology and how the technology works. So I think the most important thing is just having that interest. And when I interview people for positions on our technical support teams, for example, not many people know about OpenStack, especially here in Australia. This isn't really the kind of place where you're going to find experts in OpenStack. So I don't expect someone to walk into an interview and teach me how Nova works. But what I want to hear from people is that they're interested in stuff like, have you tried deploying DevStack? Have you tried deploying with infrared or Triplo Quick Start? Have you read about Nova? Do you understand the projects? Like, have you taken the steps that show me you're actually interested in this technology? That's the main thing I'm looking for. I don't care if you have the skills, because I can teach you the skills. I can't teach you to be interested. I can't make you interested in something unless you genuinely have an interest in it. So it's that interest thing that I think is the underpinning for everything else. If you have that interest, then I would say the next step is to make sure you're setting achievable goals for yourself. Don't start with very lofty, very broad goals. Really nail down something that you want to learn. If you want to learn about OVN, great, learn about OVN. But again, probably don't start with OpenShift. Probably just get a couple of virtual machines, deploy Open vSwitch, install the OVN controller, configure some networks, configure some OVN load balancers, configure an OVN router, do all that stuff manually, because you're going to learn about the fundamentals of OVN. And that's what I did with Open vSwitch when I wanted to learn about open flows. That was another question on the same video was, how do I learn open flow rules? You don't start with OpenStack or OpenShift. You start with just a couple of virtual machines, set up some bridges, and then start adding open flow rules to them and see what they do. See how you can shape that traffic, send that traffic somewhere else, send it over a VXLAN between two virtual machines. Start with the fundamentals. Don't start with something that's already super complex. Like if you look at open flow rules in OpenStack and that's where you're starting, that's incredibly overwhelming. If you don't understand how an open flow rule is created to begin with and the components that make that up, it's very, very difficult to start at OpenStack or at OpenShift and learn those skills. So set those achievable goals, start at the basics, and learn to change that mindset and reframe that frustration that you might feel when something doesn't work as something that you now get to learn from. Like, it's broken. Now I can learn something that I didn't know yesterday because it's broken. That's a really great experience. It's a positive thing to have happened to you as someone who's trying to learn the technology. An example of digging into something that I was interested in, when I filmed the video on moving from my Kubernetes cluster and moving applications over to OpenShift, I was really interested to see that there was an ingress class there that did the ingress to routes. So rather than just saying, oh, wow, it's cool, that works, I wanted to know how that works. So I went and found the code on the Git repo and we read through it on that video to see exactly what it's doing with an ingress to turn it into an OpenShift route, how it takes those TLS secrets and turns them into something that can be used by the route, because they're different concepts, they're different constructs. The data you provide to Kubernetes to create those objects is completely different. So for me, it was very interesting to go down that path and dig deep. One of my favorite things when I worked in the support organization within Red Hat was if a customer had a problem, I really enjoyed being able to identify the exact line of code that was breaking that problem for them. So if Nova was unable to create a virtual machine, or if Neutron was unable to plug a VIF, finding the exact line of code that caused that problem was the most rewarding feeling for me. And I really, really thoroughly enjoyed that. So I think that's the kind of mindset we need to shift into if you want to avoid burnout. And I think they're probably the most important skills if you want to have a successful career in really any industry. It starts with having an interest, and it starts with being able to set those achievable goals and break them down into a way that works for your learning style, because not everyone learns by watching videos on YouTube or by sitting in university lectures. People learn differently. So identifying how you learn, what works best for you, and then adapting the things you want to learn into that style. They're probably my biggest things, and I hope that helps and that answers those questions. And I hope that you're able to find what works for you and start enjoying the learning, enjoying the experience. But if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them as well.